In 1995, environmental historian William Cronon wrote what has become a seminal piece in the field of environmental philosophy. He called it The Trouble with Wilderness, and he starts it off pretty strongly. The time has come to rethink wilderness. The essay spans 14 or 15 pages, and Cronon discusses multiple different ideas. I'm just going to discuss two main themes that I've drawn out today. The first one is the thread that runs through the entire essay, and it's the idea of wilderness as an invented ideal. Whilst the second is something Cronon touches towards the end of the essay, something that targets us as individuals and our current beliefs and assumptions, and what we should do to change them. Ultimately, Cronon is searching for something he terms the solution, and thinks that we all should be searching for this solution. Now, this solution is really a way for humans and nature to ethically and sustainably interact and coexist. Cronon's not just writing about wilderness for no reason. He's writing about it because he thinks there's something wrong with our perception of it, and that we must change our thinking and our actions to find, ultimately, the solution he talks about. Now, the first theme that I'd like to talk about, as discussed before, is the idea of wilderness as an invented ideal. Cronon's contention here is that wilderness, as we perceive it, isn't something objective and timeless, but rather something we as humans have invented. He goes further to say that it's not just something we've invented, but rather wilderness is a mirror of ourselves, a reflection of our own unexamined longings and desires. That's how he puts it. Now, before we go any further, I just want to make clear that Cronon isn't having a go at nature, or even our experiences within nature. He's not having a go at the little moments we've had, little special moments that we hold on to. Rather, he's having a go at the perception of nature, both individually and culturally. Now, he proves the point of wilderness as an invented ideal through looking at human interaction with nature throughout history. For many years, people were just another part of nature. They lived alongside it, with it, through it. This over time changed as civilization grew and infrastructure was built and populations grew as well, I guess. Wilderness became something of a wasteland almost, something scary, something held on a pedestal in a sense, something that we were apart from. Now, Cronon reckons that this perception hasn't changed in one sense, in the effect that we are still apart from nature, but our view on it, especially in the modern world, has definitely changed. Most of us see wilderness as something to be romanticised almost, something put on a pedestal, something great and perfect. Just 200 years ago, there wasn't much nature recreation. Wilderness wasn't something that people went out in to enjoy and have a good time in like we do today. Rather, it was something maybe to be exploited, or something, yes, to explore, but not just to enjoy for what it is. You can see from this that the idea of what wilderness actually isn't something permanent. Rather, it's something that has changed and that is beholden to cultural perception. Now, this feels kind of weird to say because it seems like our current cultural perception of wilderness has always been there. It's so deeply rooted and has such influence that how could it have ever been any different? And as we've become more separated from wilderness, as we live further away and the edges of nature are slowly being eroded, we kind of put it on more of a pedestal. As it gets further away and as we get further separated from it, we put it higher in our estimations because it is so different to how we live our everyday lives. It is something completely separate. Now, you might still be asking, what is the problem with this? Sure, our perception might be a little skewed and it might not be exactly how it is, but what is actually the issue with wilderness? What is, as Cronon puts it, the trouble with wilderness? Now, the first trouble that Cronon touches on, and something that I'm quite passionate about too, is that this idea of wilderness is belittling to Indigenous cultures. In Tasmania, we see much of our nature, much of our wilderness areas as virgin land, untouched, unadulterated, something that has always been that way and we want to keep that way. that conveniently ignores the tens and thousands of years of indigenous life there. Sure, there might not be infrastructure or clear human signs, but indigenous people did live on that land, did affect that land through, for example, fire stick farming. So you could almost say that our current perception and idea of wilderness is a colonial construct. It's conveniently ignoring indigenous cultures. Cronon says that wilderness often has a false basis, and it's the product of the history it seeks to deny, which beautifully sums up this idea of wilderness as a colonial idea, not as an objective, permanent idea. Now, that's the first issue. Another issue that Cronon touches on is that the idea of wilderness is an illusion. I mentioned that it's like a mirror before of our unexamined longings and desires. But Cronon also says it's an illusion. It's not actually real in a way. This illusion that Cronon describes provides an escape for us. It provides a convenient out of our modern lives and our modern responsibility towards the natural world. This leads us really nicely into the second point that Cronon describes is an escape not just into the wilderness, but an escape from responsibility for us individuals. To understand this escape from responsibility, we have to understand to a deeper level what our perception of wilderness is. Cronon describes it as a dualistic vision, an othering, an us and them being the natural world as a whole. We kind of do this automatically. Cronon pokes holes in this automatic idea of the natural world and our relationship with it with just some simple philosophical logic. He says that, okay, so wilderness, to be untouched, can't really have any human interaction, because even small-scale human interaction degrades it to a point. So therefore, if we want this idealized, perfect, untouched idea of wilderness, we can't go there at all. Now, this sounds ridiculous, and Cronon thinks so too, and yeah, I think we all do. Of course we're not going to just stop going into nature just to keep it as it is. Yes, we'll treat it well, but we're still going to go there. Cronon goes hard against this. This is what he says. Only people whose relation to the land was already alienated could hold up wilderness as a model for human life in nature, for the romantic ideology of wilderness leaves precisely nowhere for human beings actually to make their living from the land. To exist as humans, we have to live from the land somehow, and even though in our modern lives we might not be directly doing it, someone else is, far away. They're using the land, they're exploiting it in some way, degrading it in some way, so we can live our comfortable lives. So this alienation, this dualistic vision, Cronon points out quite clearly that he reckons this is wrong, and that we have a responsibility as human beings, as part almost of the natural world, to do better. This is where the escape from responsibility comes in, because by holding up nature as this idealized thing that we can go to, we almost escape into it, to escape our responsibility to do better in our everyday lives. Cronon calls us out with his next point. He called me out when I read this. He says that we pretend that our modern lives where we, drive the same cars and we live quite wastefully and a part of the same fairly corrupt, wasteful system, he says that we pretend that this part of our lives isn't who we are, but rather nature is. That's where we truly exist and that our true colours are. But we spend most of our year, most of our time, just living normally with everyone else. We only spend some of our time truly with nature, amongst nature. So we go out into natural areas almost to cleanse ourselves, to wash away our sins of modern life. Now, we've talked about all these philosophical points and deep ideas, but what can we actually do? What can we change? How can we escape this escape from responsibility? How can we take accountability as parts of the natural world and as parts of this earth that we want to keep going? Now, Cronon recommends 2 key mentality shifts that we have to have in order to take accountability and live more ethical, sustainable lives in line with this solution that he seems to think exists. Now, the first idea of a mentality shift is one where we start learning from nature more. Oftentimes we project onto it. We go out on a trip or out into the wild for even a short period of time, projecting onto nature of what a good time will be, of what we want to do. We don't actually give ourselves time to sit and think and learn from nature. After all, it's been here a lot longer than we have. The other mentality shift, which is of course related, is we need to get away from this idea of a dualistic othering vision. This idea of us and them, of us being separated from nature. Because at the end of the day, we are part of it. We are flesh and blood, we are dust as well at the end of the day. We're members of the biotic community. Why do we put ourselves away from it? Physically, of course, but also mentally. Now, to actually enact these mentality shifts and to actually do something, which I think is sometimes more helpful than just thinking or thinking deeper or thinking differently, because that can only really get you so far sometimes. Something that we can actually do, I reckon, is to just find the little wild places close to home. Oftentimes, we're always looking to the horizon. I'm subject to this. I'm always planning a trip to a distant mountain range or a distant area well in a World Heritage area that I see as wild. Whereas I've realised, especially since reading this essay and over the past couple months, that little adventures on rivers like these that are close to home are just as fulfilling and just as great and just as wild in their own way. I'm sure everyone has somewhere close to them. Even if you live in a fairly industrial or suburban area, I'm sure there are some places, some areas that even if they have been affected deeply by humans, still have elements of what we perceive as wilderness as part of them. But all we have to do is go and look. For example, this river I drive over almost every day. It starts up on the mountain that is kind of the key visual defining point of my hometown. We take it for granted, but there are so many different little nooks and crannies and intricacies about this river. Sure, it's not a big, wild river that's going to be on the cover of National Geographic, but it's beautiful in its own way, in an almost better way. Especially personally, because I have a personal connection to this river, geographically, but also emotionally. By regaining this connection to nature, this more personal connection, and getting away from this dualism and othering, I think, Cronon thinks that then we give ourselves a chance of finding a solution, of finding an ethical, sustainable way to live our lives as part of nature, not avoiding it or being alienated from it, but not just wrapping it in bubble wrap at the same time. There's a reciprocal relationship, I think, that we need to create. Something that's less us and them and something that's just more us. Now, I've rambled a bit today and there's been lots of different ideas and lots of different thoughts, and in the essay itself there's many, many other different ideas and different thoughts. But in conclusion, I guess, today I've discussed the idea of wilderness as an invented ideal and how it's something that's created by us humans as a mirror, something that's there that has what we don't have in our modern civilization. I've also discussed that we have escaped from responsibility, that we see ourselves as other from nature and therefore treat nature as something that we can get away into rather than just live part of. Now, if you're going to take anything from this, I think the main thing is just get outside. And don't just get outside in those Instagram spots or those great epic places, but get outside on your little local river or your little local forest. Get a connection with that. See what you learn from that. I think as well, it's just worth being aware of these ideas, talking about them, with others and figuring out where you stand and what you think you can do better to live this more sustainable life, more ethical life, more of a life of us with nature rather than a life of separation. If you've got any questions, or even if you just flatly disagree with me or William Cronon, feel free to leave a comment below. I'd love to chat about this further, and I'll be making many other videos of a similar kind of grain in the future. But anyways, get outside, go for a swim, find your local river, climb a tree, do something like that. See you next time.